Rob Wehrman is a North Charleston resident who's concerned about the future of Charleston County Council's District 3 area. And that's why he's a candidate for Charleston County Council's District 3 seat. I speak exclusively with Rob for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Rob Wehrman, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Hi Quintin, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Oh, you're very welcome. Obviously, you are a North Charleston resident, and you have tons of law experience in working for a judge, being a public defender, working in the public defender's office, and obviously now you are a candidate for Charleston County District 3, which covers parts of North Charleston and Mount Pleasant. Tell me why Rob Wehrman, why now?
Well, Quintin, I will tell you that my most recent legal experience in the public defender's office has given me a lot of motivation to run. I will tell you, from my own life, I feel like as a young working family, my wife and I and our son, we feel that I'm dealing with a lot of the same issues that a lot of our clients are dealing with. Now, certainly my clients are generally low-income clients, and so I see these same issues affecting them in a much more significant capacity, but I really feel like there's an opportunity for us to unite and to move the county forward in a way that's focused on helping all working families, no matter what part of the community they come from.
As a matter of fact, you said this on your website, quote, "I'm running for county council because it is time for action. I'm committed to giving back to this community, which has given so much to me and my family." What can you now give back to the community if you're elected to office?
Well, I think I can give a pretty clear commitment to a vision that I've outlined, throughout my campaign about prioritizing, again, working families on issues like transportation, affordable housing, which is an issue I feel has been neglected for a long time, and flooding, which is an issue that I think we all know is going to be a major factor moving forward. I can certainly give back from the experience I've drawn from my legal career, which has spanned a number of capacities, as you just mentioned. Actually started out in a private firm up in New York and did real estate transactions up there. Moved over to the federal courthouse to kind of come back to South Carolina and go into public service, and worked there for a couple of years where I got to see a wide variety of cases. And obviously now working in the public defender's office, I've learned a lot from that experience. And I think the biggest thing I've learned is the need to listen and to connect with people, and to really have an open mind and an open ear when it comes to finding out what the real root of people's issues can be.
What are you listening to now when it comes to the issues of District 3, and how are you connecting with those voters?
Well, excuse me, I mean, we are trying to connect with voters in a number of ways, which has obviously been thrown kind of for a loop given the coronavirus especially. Been calling a lot of voters, and I do hear a lot of the same issues that I've seen, again, in my daily work that has kind of motivated me to take on this campaign. So, I see people talking about issues of gentrification and the difficulty finding affordable housing, issues getting around town, and issues of quality of life. So that's sort of how we've tried to reach out, is just try to go as directly as we can to meet people where they are. And I think I've found that there is a lot of appetite for some real action on those issues within the community.
How could you meet people where they are when it comes to affordable housing?
Well, I think the first thing we can do is look at the work that's been done on that issue in our community thus far. We know that CAJM made a proposal a number of years ago for basically a regional housing trust.
Right.
I know that there are other local groups, Lamsey and Metanoia, who are involved in that type of work on a smaller scale right now. And so I think looking at the ideas that they've put forward, looking at the things they've been able to accomplish, is a great jumping off point. And obviously, you also need to have a continued connection to the community, to meeting with folks, to seeing what the issues are, meeting with folks who are struggling to find affordable housing. And, I've talked with some folks who used to work in the affordable housing industry, and they say one thing that's important is just keeping a tab on industry professionals as well, helping work with them to identify, well, what are the impediments that we really have to building affordable housing here in Charleston County.
What are those impediments right now in District 3?
Well, I hear a number of things from folks in the industry. Certainly, zoning is an issue that's talked about a lot, and I think that if you were to identify one core regulatory issue, it would be zoning. Another issue that I've seen from folks on sort of the nonprofit end is acquiring financing. It's not really feasible for a lot of nonprofits to fund operations on the widest scale, or the scale that I think we really need here in Charleston County. And so giving them the ability to acquire financing, providing some financing from the county, to allow them to then go find matching funds or combine that with private industry funds, I think is one of the routes that we're going to certainly need to take.
And you also, there's two quote on your website, quote, "It's time to recognize that the housing crisis is solvable. It is simply a matter of prioritizing community interests over private interests." What are the community interests when it comes to affordable housing?
Well, I think the community interest is primarily in having affordable housing, and I think and I think our interest is in expanding our stock of affordable housing. This is an issue that I mentioned. I feel it's been neglected for a number of years. I think I've quoted a statistic saying that, the rate of income has grown so much slower than the rate of housing prices for a good decade at this point. So we're behind on this issue. I think we need to catch up, and I think we need to produce more affordable housing. Again, I think that when I say it's solvable, I think that there are tools in place. There are models that have been identified, like the land trust model, like low-income housing tax credits, and certainly I think there have been solutions proposed on the state level as well to propose some tax credits there. And I know that we don't currently have inclusionary zoning, but that's another tool that still is being discussed on some level in the community. So. I think there are a lot of solutions that have been identified, which is why I say it is solvable. Okay. It's just a matter, I think, of building a movement and building a coalition politically that's willing to put those into place.
In generalities, when you think of housing, how much has home prices risen in District 3 over the past 4 years?
I couldn't tell you an exact number of housing prices rising over the last 4 years. I'm sure that is pretty easy to get. There's some quarterly reports from the real estate industry that you can get. I'm more focused a little bit on that relationship between people's income and what the housing price is. I mean, the housing price in and of itself won't tell you a ton unless you know how much people are making. And that I can tell you, again, I couldn't tell you the last 4 years, but I can tell you in the last probably 10 years, sure, you've certainly seen housing prices outpace income at probably a 2-to-1 ratio. So housing prices are rising at twice the rate that income is rising. Certainly, and that's just for single-family housing. I think rental housing is an even higher rate than that.
And you talk. Let me reread this. It says it's simply a matter of prioritizing community interests over private interests. What incentives would you give to the developers for private interests?
Well, I think there are ways that we can do that, and there's certainly ways that we can work with the development community to make them partners in this instead of creating some sort of combative relationship. I mentioned the idea of inclusionary zoning. That is an idea that would basically say that, look, there are certain zoning regulations. A developer is generally going to want to be able to build more densely. They're going to be able to want to build more. There are reasons why we don't allow that in every case, but it is a piece of value that we can offer. From purely a regulatory perspective, it doesn't at least cost anything directly. Now, you might need to make sure that you have the services to keep up with that, but you can offer that value to a developer if they're willing to say, okay, in exchange for that, I'm going to guarantee that a certain percentage of this property is used for affordable housing, or in the case of downtown Charleston and West Ashley, they have a scheme whereby you could pay into a fund that would then be used on affordable housing in a separate location.
Let me turn over to obviously 526 and the widening over there. What in your mind is the preferred alternative for that?
The alternative for widening, you mean widening at the interchange and whatnot?
Yes, sir.
Well, look, I mean, I do think that we have for a long time neglected our infrastructure in the Charleston region. I will say, however, that I think at some point we need to stop trying to pave our way out of traffic. We've seen that the 526 that was created initially was pretty quickly overrun with capacity, and if we need to make capacity improvements, that's really a DOT project at this point and not so much a county project. If they needed county support, I'm not sure how that would factor in, but I would prefer any alternative that certainly minimizes the impact on the community when it comes to having to move people out of their communities that they've been in for a long time. I think there were a couple designs that were proposed. One was going to have to move a church. I certainly think that's a very severe impact, so I would certainly urge the state to minimize the impacts on the community if they're going forward with that project.
And I know obviously in that area there's a lot of DOT roads, but let me ask you, how should Long Point Road be widened in your mind?
Well, Long Point Road, that is a Mount Pleasant project. If Mount Pleasant needs county funding to move forward on that, we would have to take a look at it. I'm not as familiar with whether it should be or shouldn't be. I would certainly hope that anytime you're looking at widening a road, you look at the alternatives before doing that. Because the more we widen roads, the more we are binding ourselves to forms of transportation that are clearly creating other problems in our community, both pollution and then of course just the traffic itself. So I think we do need to move away from vehicle dependence as a county and as a community. As far as whether Long Point Road should be widened, if the town of Mount Pleasant decides to move forward with that, I would hope that they would do so in a way that, again, minimizes the impact on the local residents, which would be pretty severe in that particular case. I think that would again be the principle that I would stick to, is look for as many alternatives as you possibly can, be that light timing, the timing of traffic lights, be that creating alternative forms of transportation, be that rerouting certain routes into other areas that already have more capacity. If those aren't available and the town of Mount Pleasant sees fit to move forward on that, then again would certainly urge them and incentivize them as best I could to minimize any impacts on the surrounding community and certainly the homeowners along Long Point Road.
And what principle would you use as far as public transportation?
Right, well, when it comes to public transportation, I think that we see different issues in different areas. So in North Charleston, I think public transportation is something that is used with some frequency, but certainly more frequent buses along the routes would be helpful.
Okay.
I think that the bus rapid transit project is a must for our community, and that would again be it would be a bus, but it's sort of done to mimic a light rail almost. So it would have a dedicated lane, primarily down sort of Rivers Avenue and basically running down the I-26 corridor. And that would be more of a larger mass transit project trying to connect folks. I think the principles that you really need to engage in public transit tie into a lot of the issues we've already talked about, tie into affordable housing. You want to make sure that if you are allowing more density and more folks to be building in a particular area, that's done in areas that are going to be connected to public transit, so that you're going to increase that ridership and make sure that those people aren't driving as much on the roads, have more ability to walk around. I'll just mention that another principle that I think you need to guide your policy with is, how do people connect to the public transit? So it's not just building a bus station, it's thinking thoroughly about, well, how are people going to get to this bus station? Do we have the sidewalks for folks to walk down here? Do we have bike parking for folks to bike in the areas that they're going to be maybe arriving to or coming from? Do we have bike capacity on our buses for people to load their bikes on? So how do folks get to their public transit, and then when their public transit drops them off, how far are they from their ultimate destination? That's another thing we need to consider when we're designing public transit.
And obviously we're next door here at Charleston City Hall, and as you know, they developed the Dutch dialogues a couple of months ago for, you know, combating on flooding. When you look at that study, what one of those ideas or recommendations would you adopt for Charleston County Council?
Well, I think they did a really good job of tailoring a lot of their recommendations to the specific issues in each particular area. So they identified different solutions for Johns Island than maybe would be useful for downtown, than maybe would be useful for areas of West Ashley. One of the things that was talked about in some of the areas was using green infrastructure. And I would define that more broadly as just using building patterns and technologies that are focused on trying to process water on the site instead of having to move it through a traditional drainage system. Obviously, we need drainage systems, we need pumps, we need all of that, but we also need to make sure that those aren't overwhelmed. So there are regulatory changes, and there were some suggested in the Dutch dialogues. There were some even referenced in the recent resiliency element added to the comprehensive plan.
Right.
I think those regulatory changes should be pursued on the county level, and I think we should be encouraging the cities to pursue those in appropriate areas as well.
Rob Wehrman, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you again, Quintin. I enjoyed it.
Likewise.